Good morning, everyone. My name is Adam Clifford. I'm a modern work architect with concurrency from Appleton, Wisconsin. Really pleased to be out here and joining you guys today. You may wonder why a modern work guy is talking about security. For me, security is a core component of modern work. It has to be first and foremost, right? So as we're looking at how we shift to hybrid work, whether it's time, place, remote work, or time shifting, security and strong compliance has to be at the core of everything that we do. I came up through infrastructure security. I've worked in healthcare, infosec, financial services, the banking industry. I've been a director of IT, infrastructure and security, so I've been a defender. And then it's also been my name in charge of security for a large org. Been about 20 years of experience with consulting for the last 6, which is great because now I get to help my clients develop some really cool technologies. I work anywhere from SMC to Fortune 100, Fortune 10. I'm doing security assessments and implementing some really cool stuff. Pretty heavily certified in the Microsoft space. I am a Microsoft certified trainer as well. My contact card, as well as this deck and audio, is all going to be available. Afterwards, there'll be a QR code so you can download and do whatever the stuff you want, as well as all the hunting queries that we're going to be doing as well will be available for y'all as well. But yeah, if you have any questions on cybersecurity, modern work, or there's any of these certs that you're interested in going after, want some recommendations on training material, let me know. I'm sitting for my CISSP next month, which has been really fun to study for. I really nerd out over this stuff. I get really excited. Kind of what are we seeing in the marketplace right now? So looking at the threat landscape, right? Um, hybrid work, modern hybrid work has brought some changes to both how people connect and use our systems and our data, right? The It's increased the attack surface that's getting harder to defend against. At the same time, not only do we have people working remotely and accessing frontline of business apps in different ways, but we're also seeing growing numbers of vulnerabilities. CVE is being discovered in in those products. So last year alone, there were over 20,000. Social engineering is seeing, I don't want to say a resurgence. It never really went anywhere, but it's getting really, phishing is bigger than ever. Getting Attackers now are coming in, getting credentials, coming in laying low and using existing business tools instead of these big bang events. So you still see some of those, but it's the more sophisticated attackers are really heavily utilizing phishing to get in and either exfiltrate data or cause some havoc. We've seen a lot of attacks against MFA, some successful, which is difficult, right? Because MFA is one of the strongest tools that we have in our belt, right? For protecting identity and access. And seeing a strong consolidation in APT tools. So Cobalt Strike is really trendy right now. Everyone from script kiddies to more sophisticated attackers, nation state, you see a lot of consolidation around these tool sets, which can make it difficult to pinpoint. So if I see a Cobalt Strike indicator in Defender, right? Is it a drive-by? Is it a more sustained attack? So it's the consolidation of tools in some way makes it easier to attack, but it makes it harder to understand scope, right? So the challenges that we face today as defenders is that, and this is not news, right? With defenders, we have to be on 100% of the time. An adversary only has to be in one, right? We really have to have strong prevention first mindset. And when that prevention fails, we have to have the tool sets to not just remediate the threat, but also to hunt and dissect it so that we can make sure that vulnerability can't be used against us again. So what we're going to talk about today is existing technologies in 365 that we can utilize to harden against MFA bypass attacks. We're going to look at modern authentication methods and some things that we can do that are not too groundbreaking, right? But at the same time, not throwing so many hurdles in our users' face that the work becomes harder or difficult. After that, we're going to break for a little bit. Um, and then coming back, I'm going to kick off multi-stage attack in a lab environment. It's very similar to what you would see from a Cobalt Strike. And then I'm going to deputize you all into my Cliff Tech company, and we're going to hunt it and look at, again, that dissecting of how the threat came into the environment and how we can block that kind of stuff going forward. These sessions are supposed to be 3 hours. I probably have about 2 hours of content. We'll have a break in the middle. And then afterwards, if you guys want to hang out, have questions about security or anything in the modern work, the E5 compliance security stack, always just happy to just chat. Pretty informal presentation. If you guys have questions, you don't have to wait till the end, or thoughts that you want to share, something that you've seen similarly. Conversation was always great. And then a few more quick points before we dive in. Most of the stuff that we're going to talk about today is going to be E3 and higher. There are going to be a couple things. I'm a huge fan of Azure Identity Protection, and that's Azure AD P2 or E5. And I will call out on the slides which features that we're talking about that that require that. Also, as we're talking about the tech, that's half the battle. With with security, it's always good to keep in mind that the tech, but also how that aligns with our business drivers and goals. Microsoft is, I've spent most of my career being platform agnostic in the security space. I've done Cisco, I've worked for vendors that I've been a Cisco partner, Microsoft partner. I've used Splunk, CrowdStrike, but Microsoft really is best in breed in many areas. So if you already have, especially if you already have the E5 tool set, it's always good just to do annual reviews of just saying, where do I have tool overlap? And where can I have consolidation either through a reporting method or through tool integration? Because as when I was in the director of IT, I had all these really cool security tools. They didn't talk to each other. So the open framework that a lot of the current top security partners, Microsoft included, are part of, we can now share data. Because the whole thing with XDR, right? If our SIM is our data collection, XDR, the big thing is correlation of data across multiple signals. The more integration we have, either by doing single vendor for a lot of things and then pulling in additional signals, we can make it easier to threat hunt across multiple areas. And then just quick point, my tenets of modern work and, you know, being an admin, an engineer, an end user, director, this, for me, everything that we do should always hit these three. All the architecture that we design should always hit these areas, right? Obviously, we want to increase security. We have due care to the business to make sure that we're safeguarding our assets, our information, our reputation. At the same time, with new architecture, uh, you know, IT budgets aren't typically growing right now. Everyone's having to do more with less. And so how do we make sure that we're securing the environment, but at the same time, we don't have so many tools, so much process, so much tech that our existing teams can't manage that. And then finally, improved associate and user experience, right? And this is a big thing because the more onerous that we make security, the more our end users will try to bypass it and get around it, or they'll make poor choices. I can require that people change their password every week, right? What are people going to do? They're going to make horrible password decisions, or they'll write it down. And we'll talk about passwords and a little bit later. But It's finding that sweet spot is the challenge of how, the pendulum of usability versus security. I don't want to be too far secure that people can't work. Because if I had no internet access, my company would be super secure. I wouldn't have to worry about anything. But how functional am I going to be? So when we're talking about solutions, again, being secure, but also facilitating a good experience. And this is why it's so exciting for me to be in modern work right now and working with the Microsoft toolset, because a lot of this stuff we can have largely transparent security on the back end, right? So we can, and that's what a lot of what we're talking about this morning is having security that's strong, but where we're not asking our people to do anything. Kicking that off, we're going to talk about risk-based access. And when we're talking about risk-based access, we're talking about when the user logs in, we're going to identify many different components of that login. And we're going to use machine learning, AI detection. We're looking at user behavior analytics to determine how safe is this login? How legitimate is this? So looking at things like location, ISP, known internet ranges, the health and compliance of the machine, the state of the user's account, all of this stuff on every login. And what's so nice about this is a measurement of the login. We're not asking our people to do anything. So starting off with bad puns, and when we talk about conditional access and risk-based login, the one that almost everyone's familiar with is Intune device compliance. How many of you guys today are using something with conditional access? If you want to log into my system, that's cool, but your device has to be managed by Intune, has to be compliant with my security policies, right? So what's cool about the Intune compliance and that's underutilized is, yeah, there are all sorts of built-in things like do I have BitLocker on? Do I have an antivirus turned on? I don't care what it is, just has to be a antivirus system. Or is Defender there? Are my defs up to date? But you can also write your own compliance policies. Anything I can measure with PowerShell, I can I can require it and for the device to be compliant. So if you have a vulnerability agent like a Rapid7 or Tenable agent, not only do I have to have AV enabled, real-time protection has to be on, but this agent has to be there, or Arctic Wolf, right? Um, Anything that's doing data collection or integrity, right? You can require that proxy be enabled or VPN, right? Anything I can measure with PowerShell, I can require from a compliance standpoint. And other thing I think is a little bit underutilized, but just as powerful is many of the NACs out in the marketplace right now will talk to Intune to pull compliance information. So anyone running Cisco ISE, Aruba ClearPass, you can make Graph API calls. It's all fully supported, and I can pull down my device compliance status. So now I'm doing agentless hip checking, not just for my applications through SSO, but also for making routing decisions on my network. So if I have a device that falls out of compliance, maybe I'm going to kick it off the network, or maybe I'm going to drop it in a remediation VLAN, right? And until that can be resolved. Or I'm going to say, yeah, this device isn't one of mine, it's BYO. I'm going to put it in a public guest VLAN access. So not only can we use the idea of device compliance to say, um, you know, to log into either any of our systems or our critical business systems, right? I can also integrate with my NAC to be a gatekeeper for network access, which is really handy. And then coming into Defender for Identity, and this is again one of the things that requires a P2. And what Defender for Identity does is it's actually take that back. It's Azure Identity Protection. Defender for Identity is a separate product, so my bad on the slide there. But what this protection does, and this is really pulling off two main concepts about risky users and risky sign-ins. And I can combine that with that device-based access to get a whole picture of my users and where they're coming from to make educated decisions on what they are allowed to access or what they should be allowed to access. So we're talking about risky sign-ins. This is looking at information around where the sign-in is coming from, right? So it's going to look at, for example, I live in Appleton, Wisconsin. I got to the hotel yesterday, went to sign in to 365, my tenant, as my with my admin account. And when I went to log in, Microsoft said, "Whoa, this says unusual login. I've never seen you sign in from Minnesota before." So it's going to ask me to revalidate my identity. And there's several ways you can do that, either by just doing another MFA process, or maybe you can require a password reset if you want, or you can say, "Hey, please just open a ticket and someone from IT has to clear your risk level." It's all not just looking at unusual behaviors, because Microsoft collects a lot of information about where you log in from, what ISPs, that kind of stuff. It's pretty slick. But also things like impossible travel. Am I logging in from one area in a physical location and another? Is it possible for me to make that trip within the time allowed? And if not, I'm going to flag that. It's also going to look at known Tor egress nodes, VPN providers. I have a NordVPN account that I use to connect open Wi-Fi's access points. It's aware of what those nodes are. So if it looks like someone's trying to bypass like a GeoIP restriction or something like that, Microsoft collects a ton of data on that kind of stuff. It's looking at password spray attacks, IP addresses that have been flagged by their threat intelligence services for being known to be affiliated with bad actors or malware activity. And then also connections from infected devices. So if I have Defender on my machine and triggered an alert, excuse me, I may say, you know what, that sign in is too risky. I really don't want to allow that. Or again, I want someone to validate. And risky sign ins, just the Intune compliance, this doesn't have to be an all or nothing thing. I can do it app by app. So anything that ties into Azure AD for authentication. So I can say my ERP system, any of my critical stuff, I want that all to be at a risk level of low or below, or medium or below. Risky users. This is a fun one also. Risky users are all based around the health of the user. So this was a pretty big deal in the Uber incident, happened last fall. One of the initial attack vectors for that were credentials purchased off the dark web. Whether Uber itself leaked it through phishing or some other breach, or a lot of times people reuse passwords. I create an Adobe account to download Creative Cloud. And if I don't have SSO set up, if I reuse my password, that leaks. I can try that. I can go find that stuff on the dark web. There's a shocking amount of information about us on the dark web. For the price of a beer, I can probably pull credit card information for most of us, right? So not really a surprise. There's just so much data out there, it's hard to operationalize it. Risky users, one of the things that Microsoft is doing is scouring the dark web and looking for password hashes that match UPNs in your directory structure. Whereas I'm not saying risky users would have prevented the Uber incident, we don't know, right? But I can proactively require a user to update their password if if that password has been associated with a known breach. So you can see in the screenshot here. We can look at all the different users. We can look at their investigation priority, and we can even drill down and look at incidents over time. It gives them a score, and I can look at all the different indications of why that user is risky. And then if I examine it and say, you know what, this is cool, all this stuff is normal, I can clear that risk score and Microsoft will start building it anew. And just like with risky sign-ons, this can be a factor of access for conditional access. And then, yeah, so conditional access, then all of these things that we talked about, risky sign-ins, risky users, and the health and state of the device, all of this stuff can now be applied at every login. And again, this is transparent. We're not asking users to do anything. We're not asking them to jump through hoops or verify their identity, but we are measuring every single login. And this doesn't just apply to Microsoft stuff, right? Anything that federates for SSO, this is one of the reasons I'm such a big proponent of single sign-on with SAML or OAuth or whatever it is that we're going to do. Because not only is it a better end user experience, especially with seamless SSO, my users are getting prompted less, which means I can be phished less, but also all of these protections now apply. And the app doesn't have to be aware of the Intune's device compliance. It doesn't know. But because Microsoft is fronting the login for all these SAML and SSO applications, I can measure all of that and then make decisions on whether or not that access is going to be allowed. And it doesn't even have to be like a full out block, right? If I see a user that's risky coming from weird IP address, and I think it's a little sus, I may not want to block them, but I may want them to do a password reset. And one of the things that they may have to do is verify a code to their personal email address. A lot of people don't like using personal email um, for that kind of stuff. It's actually really nice because it requires the attacker, if it is a threat actor, to not just compromise a work account, but also compromise a personal account. So we have some additional segregation there. I may require a password change. I may require a step up MFA prompt. Those are all things that I can do. I don't just have to flat out say, you're bad, go sit in the corner until your risk level clears. All kinds of cool stuff that we can do with it cross platform and again, completely invisible. Passwordless auth. This is something that I feel very passionate about, and it's actually really fun to deploy. And the big caveat I'll throw out here is that I know technically in principle passwords is awesome, right? But I also know that there are some compliance regimes that haven't caught up that allow for passwordless auth. And PCI, I'm looking at you. So there, just because from a technology standpoint, it's very strong, there's lots of benefits for it. Make sure that it's compliant with any regulatory or compliance obligations you may have. 'Cause that's a big thing. But passwordless, we're just saying instead of using passwords like we always have, we're going to use other things to log in. And there's lots of options. There's biometric FIDO2 keys. I have a bunch of stuff here. It's like Windows Hello for Business. I think most people are familiar with the 3D face camera that scans my face just like on the iPhone. With Windows Hello, not only can I require biometric, I can do multi-factor unlock where I have to do a PIN code as well as a biometric. Standalone fingerprint readers, things like FIDO2 keys. Most people, I'm sure, have seen a YubiKey. This is made by Authortrends. What I like about this is that, so with the FIDO key from Ubico, on most of them that don't have biometric, I enter a PIN to unlock what's essentially a little mobile TPM. With this, there's a little fingerprint scanner on the side. So I just touch and I'm in. So it's very quick. Windows Hello for Business is device based, which means I enroll that device. My biometric gesture is only good on that device, my PIN code, device specific. FIDO2 keys are user based, so they're tied to a user identity. I can plug that into any computer, whether I own it or not, and say I'm logging in with this. And then you have authenticator, number matching biometric with enhanced notifications that we'll talk about as well. So one of the reasons that passwordless is awesome is pretty much everyone hates passwords, right? They're hard for people to remember. They're getting more and more easier for people to guess. Passphrases help a lot, but they're not really catching on in a lot of different places. People reuse them. They make bad decisions, iterating just a number at the end. Or my wife, my joke with my wife is that her password's always a pet or a family member with a year and an exclamation point at the end. And I know a lot of users have that problem too. When I was a like, IT director, we did an audit of our security audit, and they dumped the NT password hash for the domain, and 40% of all the users in New York had the same password because the help desk was resetting everyone to welcome one exclamation point. So, so yeah, and the mantra used to be right. Passwords like everywhere, change them often, don't reuse them. But if you look at misguidance, starting about 2.5 years ago, that started to change. And so now the recommendation is longer passwords changed less frequently, backed with some kind of behavioral or detection system, right? So that risk-based access that we just talked about definitely qualifies. So we're looking at all those additional aspects of login, not just the thing that everyone has that everyone hates. Also, if I'm not logging in with a traditional password, how much harder is it for me to get phished if I'm never in a password? And if I do have a password that does get phished, but I'm using strong risk-based access, now the adversary has to come in from a device that's compliant using login times and locations and all these other things that are typical for that user. So again, we're not making it impossible. We're not eliminating risk completely, which is possible, but we're dropping it way, way down. The other thing from a business standpoint, so I implemented one of the last projects I implemented before going into consulting was company-wide rollout in Windows Hello for Business. And when I ran the numbers, because I had to get cost justification for this, because we had to buy some hardware, we had to update our default build for our laptops to make sure everyone came with a biometric, either a fingerprint scanner or the 3D camera. We had shared computers that we needed fingerprint scanners for. But I was curious to see what the impact has on the business for account lockout. For most organizations I work with, if you ask help desks, what's the number one issue? Account lockouts, right? Running the numbers on downtime for team members, and we had an internal metric of $60 an hour. We were losing $130,000 a year of lost productivity due to account lockouts. After implementing passwordless, it went from our number one trouble ticket item to like number 18. So users were calling in way less often. The CEO is former Green Beret. He thought it was the coolest thing ever that I can log in with my finger. So there's a lot of user appeal, especially when you tell them, hey, you're not going to have to enter a password anymore. At concurrency, mm, I don't even know what my password is right now. I still have one. Microsoft is going down the road. That's why if anyone has an Outlook account, Outlook.com account, you can already remove the password completely and not even have one. You can do authenticator, you can do many different ways, but you already have the option to go completely passwordless. Down the road for 365, is going to be the ability to do the same thing. And people say, how do we onboard? How do we do all this other stuff? You already have built in Azure AD one-time use passwords. So when you onboard a user, you can generate a one-time use password. And maybe that password is only used once to, on first login, to enroll your 502 key or to do authenticator-based login or set your credentials for Windows Hello. So all the groundwork, all the tools are there to go passwordless today. But yeah, because we do so much with SAML single sign-on, and I unlock my computer with my face. I never use my password, and if I had to log into something today, I would probably have to go reset it first. Moving on to multi-factor authentication. So in the opening, one of the things that I mentioned was that we've seen a lot of attacks on MFA. Lapsus, SolarWinds, Uber, their Box.com had a big one recently where threat adversaries were able to bypass MFA using a couple of means that we'll talk about. So, yeah, MFA, as everyone knows, right? It's a combination of different factors that combine together to validate a login. So, common things are something you know, a password or a device pin. Speaking of device pins, I'm going to deviate for a second. One of the questions I get a lot for Windows Hello is how is a device pin different from a password? And it's important to pull it out. Microsoft has a great white paper on this, but that PIN code is only used to unlock a secure enclave on the TPM chip so that the laptop or the device can do asymmetric key pair authentication against Azure AD. So the password never traverses the network. It just doesn't. So if I'm snooping on the network, I don't see anything. There is a lot of anti-hammering technology built in. I only get 5 guesses before I have to revert back to the password. So if you have security people saying these PIN codes are garbage because they're only 6 characters, 4 characters, but right. Remember, it's only for that device. You only get a very limited number of attempts before it forces you to revert back to the password. And again, all we're doing is unlocking the TPM chip so that we can do that certificate-based authentication. Something we have, a compliant device, right? We talked about with Intune that is the device managed by the organization compliant with my security policies? Or it's a cell phone, right? Where I can validate a phone number or an SMS. Um, you see a lot of these have fallen out of favor. There's still a lot of great uses for it. They've gotten a lot cheaper. Safe ID makes a lot of great stuff. We're not affiliated with them, but many, this is cool. It's a card. Just hit the button and it shows the code. Really useful if you have like call center employees or somewhere where you can't have cell phones, where we can't rely on people to have cell phones. A lot of these are $10. So they've really come down in cost. The RSA tokens when I was in healthcare were like 50, $60 a piece. It was pretty ridiculous. And they're fully supported by Azure AD. Really easy to onboard. You get a list of serial numbers and the seed codes from the vendor. You upload it in Azure AD. You just assign it to a user. And on first login, they enter 2 codes and you're up and running. Don't overlook some of the more traditional methods of MFA because in some ways, especially, well, I always carry one from my personal tenant because I may be someplace where I don't have internet access. It is rare, but it happens. So if I can't get a text or a cell phone or do authenticator, it's always nice to have something in my pocket, literally could be in my wallet, that I can just get that code for so I'm safe. Not all MFA methods are created equal. This is a chart from Microsoft showing they consider to be strongest. We'll talk about why some of this stuff is. And a new recently new in conditional access is a way to require certain levels of strength of MFA. So again, we can say there are some applications that are generally available or everyone can use because they're easy or they're low cost to implement, and I will accept the risk for that stuff. But again, where I keep the crown jewels or my ERP system or something like that, where I want I have sensitive data, PCI, PHI, whatever it is, trade secrets, that kind of stuff. For those, I'm going to require a stronger MFA method because when I go to with Azure AD, right, when I go to log in, I can always hit that other options, right? And I can pick, am I signing in with hello? Am I signing in with authenticator? Am I entering a code from a OTP token? So with conditional access now, I can require on certain applications that, we're not going to allow phone call based MFA. Number matching is now the default, right, for Azure. This was rolled out a year ago. This is really cool. And the reason I like this so much, and we'll talk, this is also related to some MFA methods being stronger than others, is the fact that I can't tell you how many times I've worked with companies to deploy MFA and we really hit, right? It's not just the tech, you have to do training and awareness. It has to be part of your security program. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Um, but only for a couple weeks, a couple months later, they call back. Adam, we helped us do MFA, but we had an incident. This was supposed to protect that. What happened? Company I worked with, the VP got phished earlier in the day. The attacker logged in and sent a tap to approve notification to their phone. They missed that, but then the attacker switched and said, call me instead. They answered the phone, they hit pound to approve. So MFA worked exactly as they designed it, right? It was that we designed it, sorry. But with number matching or text message, anything where I have to validate information on multiple devices, if I'm not in front of my computer, I only have a 1 in 100 chance of entering the right number. And I'm sure you guys have all had this too. It's a work day. I may be out for lunch. I get an MFA prompt. I'm 90 some percent sure it's just Outlook, re-authenticating my session tokens, re-upping. And it's tempting just to hit approve to make it go away, but I don't know. And so part of our awareness and training for MFA, we have to have that mindset and to make sure our associates have a mindset of, did I just take an action where it makes sense for me to see an MFA request? And if the answer is no, I do not approve it. I need to notify the IT security team.
That you call and you just
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, and we could see it in the logs. And we told them like, hey, look, this is exactly what happened. We can track it. We can track it through the process. So yeah, no, because this is a push. So what you're saying here is a push notification that comes from the authenticator app. So you can use other authenticator services. Like I know DuoTap integrates directly with Azure AD. There's a way that you can tie that in. And I haven't looked at Duo in a while. I'm sure Cisco has something similar to this because they're also no slouches at security. But yeah, this is now default. So if you were to turn on MFA today and you say I'm gonna do authenticator, as of I think it was February or March of this year, this is now the default. So you can no longer just do that blind tap to approve, which while super convenient, always drove me crazy from a security standpoint. Because like I play chess on my phone or Candy Crush, or whatever we waste our time on. And how often are you looking at your screen and I'm tapping something and that notification just comes up, I accidentally tap it. To me, that's not great security, right? I can accidentally approve an MFA without doing any of that stuff. Also, the enhanced notifications is something that you have to enable. It's not by default. This is a mixed bag. I really like the fact that it shows the app that the person is trying to sign into, that they're trying to access. That's great. The location is mostly great. It depends on yes, yes, yep. Or if I have a hub and spoke VPN system at corporate where all internet traffic egresses through a main location. If the device has a GPS chip, like a cell phone, it will use that GPS location. But if it's a laptop or something that doesn't have GPS, it's based purely off your egress IP location. And so this, it's, I have really mixed feelings on it. Again, it has to go out with awareness training and behavior reinforcement because otherwise, like you said, people see it and they go, I'm not in Boston. My cell phone provider, if I'm tethered on my laptop, I always egress through a couple different places. But yeah, so it's interesting. So something that the enhanced notifications on the fence about, but the number matching really great again because again, not only is it good MFA, but it also helps reduce about drive-by attacks. The other thing with number matching, and we talked about Azure Authenticator as an MFA, you can enable that as an MFA as a passwordless option. So for anything it doesn't yet work to get into your computer, but if I try to log into something, I can say log in with Authenticator. I just put my username in, I get the notification, I do the number matching, and then my iPhone's going to do a 3D scan of my face, and so that's a multi-factor unlock, and I'm not entering passwords. So if you guys want to start dabbling with passwordless as an option, doing the authenticator based passwordless, you can enable it in Azure AD, I think across almost all levels of Azure AD, except maybe the free one. This can be turned on, and so users can say more options and they can say log in with my password or log in with authenticator. So it's a great way to test the waters. And the only thing, like I said, is it's not going to get you into your computer.
Could you try again?
Yeah, no one asked you. Yeah, yep, yep. The exchange, the at level of Azure AD that from the 365 allows for it. I don't believe you need P1. I don't believe you do, but that would be the only thing that may be a requirement. What was that? Yeah, yep. Because it's app. And we'll talk about SIM swapping. But yeah, that's one of the attack vectors because it's tied to the app. It's not tied to your number. You would have to do a full clone of a phone because every authenticator, again, GUID based, like I can't just download Authenticator and have access to all my passwords, right? I have to re-enroll. Even if I back up to Outlook and restore it, I still have to re-authenticate that stuff. So MFA fatigue, one of the big bypass methods, and it's shockingly more common, I think, than most people realize. Lapsus, sorry, SolarWinds and Uber, once they had the credentials, both times are the one with SolarWinds, it was an admin at 1 in the morning. They got prompt bombed. Their phone kept over and over beeping, beep, beep, beep. And they finally just hit approve to make it go away. So that's to me, 2 failures of MFA. We don't have the number matching. We're not validating information across. And also, yeah, they just approved it. If we make people do MFA too often, we stop thinking about what we're doing and it becomes muscle memory. So as your AD, right, I can go in, I can say, hey, don't ask me again for 14 days or 7 days, whatever we're comfortable with. And that's important to remember that's device based. Not only that, but even browser and device based. So if I say don't ask me again for 14 days and I open up an incognito window or I pull up my cell phone and try to log in, that's a different device. I'm going to have to do MFA there. So there has to be a balance between enough MFA. Yep, always. I think 14 days is good. But again, regulatory compliance obligations, what do we have there? And when we pair that with the risky side and risky users, one of the options that we have for remediation is a step up of MFA. So I can say if someone's at corporate, they're using their primary device, they're only going to get prompted once every 14 days. But if I'm moving around a lot, connecting to VPNs, I'm going to do it more often because my risk level is higher. I don't like excluding MFA from corporate because once if once I have a as an attacker, once I have a toehold in that computer, in any device that's connected to your network, what's going to stop me from lateral transfers and other stuff? There's really nothing, right? Right. Yep. Absolutely. So this is funny and also sad. There was a website that ran for 8, 9 months, don'tduo.com. And their big pitch was for the price of a cup of coffee a month, they would automatically approve all your Duo MFA requests. So you could enroll as a soft token and they would just approve it. And I love this. Log in as usual, take a break, have some coffee, recover your time from having to do MFA, right? Um, Cisco got it shut down, but yeah, this was a real thing. And we talk about MFA fatigue is bad for many reasons. Again, we stop thinking it's muscle memory, but then also if security is too onerous, like we talked about earlier, people are going to find a way, stupid ways to go around it. And so that's an internal threat that we have to make sure that we're covering. So yeah, MFA, so SIM swapping, right? SIM hacking or hijacking is not as hard as you might think. I worked in cellular in college, and there are a lot of the stores are owned by AT&T, Verizon, but you also have all these indirect stores. Anyone can be a reseller, and they have full access to systems. Paying a minimum wage worker to swap a SIM card, couple $100, couple $1,000, not in the realm of impossibility. And now I can intercept MFA prompts. Prompt bombing, we talked about token theft. Consent phishing is really big for OAuth, right? So it's putting up a fake OAuth page, capturing that, passing it through. Session hijacking. This is what Box.com got hit with. There was a way that you could interrupt the login process, but you already had a session token. And by interrupting the MFA, it allowed users or adversaries to completely bypass it altogether. So is microservices and all this modernization of web design is really cool and very beneficial, but we have systems talking to each other. And if you can intercept tokens or session identifiers, I can then replay those and not have to do the need for MFA. And then social engineering as well. You guys ever watch the this is one of my YouTube rabbit holes I went down. Kit Boga and some of the other people that mess with the scammers. And you watch some of them and they're like, oh, yeah, we need to verify your identity. Give me your email address. And then you're going to get a text message and you need to tell me to verify that. And now I'm in your Google account. I'm changing your password. So it is, and like I said, social engineering, as the technology gets better and better, the weakest link sometimes is people. We're fallible. We look for patterns. And if if my attack can play into your pattern recognition, there's a higher chance it's going to be successful. So, so that leads us to MFA needs to be part of your security program. It can't just be a checkbox that we have because it's required for cybersecurity insurance or compliance. And so what do I mean by that? Regular trading, and this is a question I like to, what's more important, awareness or changing behavior? w- I can do phishing testing all day long, and I may see people fall for phishing. They're aware of phishing as a thing, but if we're not changing behavior, awareness training by itself is not sufficient. We need to have a process in our a security policy and our processes and our playbooks that when we have an MFA prompt that we don't recognize or we're not sure is legit, that must be reported. IT has to hunt that down. It's more work, I get it, but this is important stuff. Regular awareness training on why we do MFA, and a lot of times this can come as a benefit too, especially if we're doing things like saying, "Hey, people, we're changing how we do MFA. We're implementing passwordless. We're not gonna make you do MFA as often, and we're gonna improve your life. You're not gonna fight back as much because this is how it benefits you." Flip side, though, is that when you see something strange, it needs to be reported. This protects you, it protects the company, right? Security is a global mindset. And then from an audit standpoint, if I'm using risky users, risky sign-ins, having a team member once a week is part of my security policy that go in and audit that kind of stuff, or just do regular reviews. What countries are people logging in from? Is there anything weird? You know, again, because we're not always looking with the trend changes how we look at security. It's not always this is malicious because I have something that tells me it is, like a rule. It's malicious because potentially because it's behavioral anomaly, right? So looking at our Azure AD sign logs, looking at our MFA logs, and just saying, is there anything that kind of stands out from the norm? In a lot of stuff, right? This isn't just MFA, but a lot of critical stuff. We can't always look at security tools as just a checkbox, right? We have to have not just the technology, but the process and the people around them to ensure that they're successful. So, yeah, that's a lot of just the modern approaches to security. And this is a lot of the trends I'm seeing when I'm engaging with clients. This is the stuff we're looking at is how do we increase security without being onerous? That way that our end users aren't gonna hate, but our security team is gonna like.